One of the most shocking scenes that took place in the debate yesterday, I'm finishing up from the last one for whatever reason the channel dropped off, but one of the most shocking aspects of the debate, and again, this is one of those moments where people on the left was like, that is my president, that's my president, was when a question, implicitly racist question, hit Sanders, basically asking him, you're going to be the first Jewish candidate in the race. Are you going to move the embassy in Tel Aviv? Now, to some degree, what they're getting at here is, look, you're Jewish. Who is your allegiance going to be to? Now, Sanders could say, no, I'm going to leave it where it is since it's already moved. Or he could say, we're going to move it back. Now, if he says we're going to move it back, this gets into this notion of who do you represent? Meaning, it is our embassy. Israel clearly wants it to be in Jerusalem for obvious political effect and political reasons. And you being Jewish, are you going to move it out of Jerusalem? Now, Sanders is American. It would be weird for Sanders, as an American, to be looking out for the interests of Israel over the interests of America. And as such, when he's looking at Israel, all things being equal, as a nation among other nations. Meaning the behavior that Israel is taking has nothing to do with the religion in regards to Israel. It has everything to do with the land. It's a political situation. And as I look at a political situation, I can evaluate whether the behavior that has taken place will be tolerated if it was in another country that was not named Israel. Sanders looks at Israel and makes this argument about Palestinians are human beings. Now, this is a shocking argument if you're living in America, but it's patently obvious to anybody else that they are indeed human beings. And like other human beings that require clean food, clean air, water, the ability to grow and to be a part of a larger community and to excel, this notion of human actualization. And when those things are not present, people in that area would suffer. Meaning there is no potential to resolve the conflict dealing with land when you are being unfair to one of the parties that is in the mix. And for the longest time, that has been American policy, this dog and pony show of trying to come up with some kind of deal when really we're giving billions of dollars and turning a blind eye to the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel killed over 2,200 people several years ago under the Obama administration. Obama was still giving them weapons while they were massacring all of those people. It was understood, even at the time, that 80% of the people being killed were civilians. That in no way stopped us from still giving them unilateral support. How can you ever get a deal? How? How can you ever even get the quote-unquote stated objective of stopping the illegal building of settlements when the United States is always, in this unilateral way, complete fealty and allegiance to whatever Israel wants, being the bodyguard to block any kind of security considerations? And also, again, dog and pony show of, yeah, we're trying to get a deal. Really, you're only looking out for the interests of one of the parties in that mix. It is clear as day, that the interests of the United States is to work with Israel, not the Palestinians. This deal of the century that Donald Trump put forth is utter nonsense. They came up with a deal among themselves. There wasn't a Palestinian even in the room. Palestinians were an afterthought. So how do you actually get something accomplished? Maybe you get something accomplished when you go into the deal with a fair arbiter, meaning a person who's looking at Israel for what it is, and also looking at Palestinians as actual human beings that also want the best for themselves and the best for their ability to proceed as they will. Sanders took the strongest position that I have ever seen in a debate on the subject of Israel and Palestine. And he goes further into saying what is indubitably true, that Benjamin Netanyahu is a racist, reactionary government. This was shocking to the people in the debate stage, but listen to the applause that it got, even from an audience full of people, effectively lobbyists and wealthy wealthy donors or wealthy people or that were sponsored by the Democratic Party, even among this Bloomberg wine cave crowd, they end up applauding Sanders on this point. Welcome. Part 2. Last night's debate. The soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. I have several super chats that I need to read from the last video. This is Oraz. The pinch down effect is a problem with the streaming software. Maybe the sample rate. I'm not sure what went on. It looks like there was a lag in the stream itself, and when the lag in the stream just went down. Megan Morales, check your audio. Deep voice again. Oh God, not again. All right, let me see. Tulsi, this one was on the other one. Let me check the stream. Am I doing the deep voice thing again, guys? Or is the sound okay? Okay, what about now? Is the voice still really deep? Your audio is off. All right. Audio is good now. Good. All right. So let's go into the Israel one. Excellent. All right. So let's go to the Israel one. So this is Sanders being asked the question basically, hey, you're Jewish. Are you going to move the embassy? You've been somewhat critical of Israel on this point. So what are you going to do if you get in? Now, think for the moment of the theme of this election. The person who's winning this election is making a strong domestic argument that workers need more agency in their jobs, they need higher wages, and we as a society needs to start using some of the resources for the society for our own ends, meaning to ensure human development. We're going to cover healthcare, we're going to cover education. Those are two major expenses, but those are also expenses that deal with freeing individuals from these particular regressive costs. They're asking him, however, about Israel and Palestine. It's not that this is necessarily a bad question. It's more so that of all the questions that you want to ask Bernie Sanders about, yes, this is a good question. This is perfectly fine. But you spent time talking about the Russiagate stuff. You spent time talking about all of these issues. The coronavirus barely gets a mention. You have Buttigieg talking over Sanders. It's effectively all these people talking over each other. It just seems that the questions miss out on the major themes of what is currently going on. But again, fair enough. He's the first Jewish candidate. You have to ask a question on Israel. He knocks this out of the park.
Jewish president. You recently called a very prominent, well-known American Israel lobby a platform for, quote, bigotry. What would you say to American Jews who might be concerned you're not, from their perspective, supportive enough of Israel? And specifically, sir, would you move the U.S. Embassy back to Tel Aviv?
Let me just, the answer is it's something that we would take into consideration.
Which would,
but here, excuse me, but here is the point. I am very proud of being Jewish. I actually...
Now, think for the moment why he has to say that, or why he feels the need to say that. Because he understands implicit in that question is, are you Jewish enough? Are you a self-hating Jew? Now, he says, what about the constituents that may feel some qualms about you calling that a racist organization? And again, all of this is tied to the notion of his Jewishness. Well, he feels the need at that point to establish, cuts him off, says, excuse me, I am proud of my Jewish heritage. He would have never had to felt that he needed to say that if he didn't feel that this was being questioned. Let's let him finish, though.
Lived in Israel for some months. But what I happen to believe is that right now, sadly, tragically, in Israel, through Bibi Netanyahu, you have a reactionary racist who is now running that country. And I happen to believe that what our foreign policy in the Mideast should be about is absolutely protecting the independence and security of Israel. But you cannot ignore the suffering of the Palestinian people. We have got to have a policy that reaches out to the Palestinians and the Americans. And in answer to your question, that will come within the context of bringing nations together in the Mideast.
Mayor Bloom.
Great answer. Great answer. I mean, basically, he's Jewish, so he has a certain degree of protection in making this forceful of a statement going after Bibi Netanyahu. Typically, they would just scream he's being racist or anti-Semitic or something. What they do say is, oh, Bernie Sanders is a self-hating Jew. Why? Because Bernie Sanders is looking at American foreign policy and says, what is in the interest of American foreign policy, and is solving this issue. Part of that, the answer is yes. Can I solve this issue by being dramatically and continuing to be dramatically unfair to one side in this issue, meaning the Palestinians? The answer is no. Do you have to be honest in your appraisal? The answer is yes. His honest appraisal is Bibi Netanyahu is a racist. Now, that reactionary racist may be going to jail, but unfortunately for Palestinians, the other governments are just as bad in regards to dealing with the Palestinians. So Sanders, and his point is, in order to really solve this issue, you have to address this. A, the plight of the Palestinians, the fact that they are human beings, that they require the things of life in the same way that you do. But B, in his case, protecting the integrity of Israel. Of anybody that has any potential to try to actually move this along, Sanders is the one to do it. And because of this, and because he's not having this kind of fealty and allegiance to Israel, he's not even going to the AIPAC meeting. They hate his guts, meaning they've been trying to run ads and everything else attacking Sanders, meaning the Jewish organizations. I've never heard a president say that, or a person running for president say that. I've never seen a position staked out that straight and that strong. And the other candidates look like they didn't necessarily entirely know how to respond to it. They didn't attack him for it. And if you listen to the audience, they applauded. That's mind-blowing. Like, the audience applauded. Like think back to, I don't know, 8 years ago, even 16 years ago. Could you ever have imagined a candidate staking out this specific position in regards to Israel? I can't. I mean, and like I said, in the last video where you had the situation of Sanders making this argument about American foreign policy, I mean, honestly, I applauded this. When this happened, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody said this. It's just honest.
Idea to be honest about American foreign policy. And that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran. And when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that.
Now, all of this, again, is this hysteria over this notion that Bernie Sanders said something nice about Fidel Castro, as if dictatorships can never do anything nice. Now, this is mind-blowing considering, and not just mind-blowing, cynical and hypocritical, not to mention batshit crazy. As a flat fact, it is either true or not to make an assertion about what a government has accomplished. Hitler's likes dogs. Is that good or bad? Well, it just is. Now, if you like dogs, you might think that's a good thing. If you don't like dogs, you may not care one way or the other. I think it's a good thing because I personally like dogs. Now, it is nonsense to say that nothing Hitler did was right. So, for example, part of the reason that Hitler was able to gain some level of popularity because in the beginning, the economy and everything else, especially for people, was good. So the notion that Hitler didn't do anything right would be utter nonsense. But that's the same thing either for China. The number of people that China raised out of poverty is mind-blowing. Like, the numbers are phenomenal. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. By the same token, is it an authoritarian government? Yes. Both of those things can exist at the exact same time because right and wrong does not exist as an absolute. Ultimately, what you have are just the numbers for those particular societies. And some of those numbers we judge to be good and some we judge to be bad. As an authoritarian government, yes, that's a number that's bad. From the standpoint of the number of people you're bringing out of poverty, that number is good. You have to be honest in your appraisal of this stuff. Cuba did an amazing job in the standpoint of doctors and the standpoint of education. Both of those things are just flat fact, true. Obama made the same assertion, but again, you shouldn't have to invoke Obama for an assertion that just so happens to be flat fact true. Sanders did the right thing in this by not running from this argument. And he goes further in this argument, making the point that we were overthrowing governments around the world: Guatemala, Iran, El Salvador, Nicaragua. Like, Reagan was literally selling weapons to a country we consider to be our enemies, Iran, in order to get money to skirt the Bolin Act. The Bolin Act to tell Reagan not to do what Reagan was using that money to do, which was essentially fund insurgencies in South America, death squads. Abramson, the guy who's there now, who got convicted of lying to Congress and, yeah, of running those death squads, that guy was the guy who got convicted for that. I think it was somebody else also. I guess my point being, we were funneling money into death squads. And again, death squads. It is exactly what it sounds like. This notion of trying to overthrow leftist governments that we didn't particularly like. I mean, for fuck's sake, put that in perspective. How many people got killed because of that? The Iran Revolution, well, we didn't necessarily like the fact that they wanted to use their oil basically they wanted to use the resources of their country for the people of that country, and we didn't particularly like the fact that they wanted to get more of the oil revenue. So we, CIA, working with Britain, overthrew the Iranian government. We overthrew multiple, Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras. I mean, for fuck's sake, what do you think happened when we overthrew those governments? Do you realize the CIA was setting bombs in regards to killing various political actors or military leaders in various countries that stood in the way of them knocking over those leftist governments? I mean, it's just a mind-blowing thing to be in a debate and they're going after the guy because the guy make the point about, yeah, this particular government did this thing right. As if we are this saintly position somewhere and we don't factor into the context of the debate. And Sanders is forced to remind people, look, at some point you got to be honest about what America has been doing in this world and propping up governments, that are dictators. We have no issue with dictators either in Saudi Arabia or strongman Erdogan. And yeah, the relationship we had with China was perfectly okay for the United States when all of these companies were making all of that money exploiting China, or at the very least making all that money by bringing goods in from China and shipping jobs overseas. All I'm saying is we have this American perspective and it's so narrow. And it's so narrow to the point that reporters will ask questions with the framing as if we don't factor into what they're talking about. There's a level of blind hypocrisy that is profound. So the fact that Sanders says this in response and defense to this notion of Cuba, he didn't run. And that's a positive sign. He did not run. All right. And by the way, he pushes back on this again because they asked him once before. They were like, hey, how do we know you're not going to give over the farm to other authoritarian dictatorships? He's like, what? Oh, yeah, because you're a democratic socialist. You're going to be, amenable to dictatorships. And you're stuck in this position having to point out Saudi Arabia is a religious, totalitarian, batshit crazy state that every president going all the way back to FDR to now have effectively been bound to because of this oil for peace deal that we struck with them. We don't seem to have an issue with that dictatorship. The Tillerson memo that was released that was leaked out, that made the point that, look, we hit people who are our enemies, but places that are our friends, we give a pass to. Meaning we don't say anything about dictatorships that are our friends. So Egypt gets a pass. Turkey gets a pass. Saudi Arabia gets a pass. Some of the other Gulf states gets a pass. China, not so much. They're not our ally. Syria, not so much. They're not our ally. I hope you see the pattern in this. The governments we were toppling and overthrowing in order to put strongmen in. I mean, Allende, for fuck's sake. I guess I'm making the point that these were governments that we overthrew and put in dictators that we backed. Like the fact that Sanders doesn't give that history lesson. And maybe he should have went into more detail, making the point that we were backing dictators. I mean, he just said overthrew governments. He didn't necessarily get into what came after those governments were overthrown, which is maybe the point that he should have nailed that much stronger. Meaning we don't have any issue with dictators. Our issue is with dictators that we don't necessarily control. Keep it honest.
I think what you happen, I find it very interesting that I saw what Barack Obama had to say when he was talking to Cubans. He made the right point. He says, your economy is terrible. You're living in poverty. You've done some good things in healthcare and education. I agree with that. Obama said it, no problem. I said it, oh my God, the world is falling apart.
But you know, you're a democratic socialist. That was a socialist regime. You can understand why there's misperceptions.
No,
there's at least misperceptions.
Those are political attacks. It's not misperceptions. The views that I believe in, when it's healthcare for all, having a tax structure that is, look, we have an insane situation where Amazon, owned by the wealthiest guy in America last year, after making $11 billion in profit, didn't pay a nickel in taxes. Think that makes sense? Do you think it makes sense that we give tax breaks to billionaires and you have 500,000 people sleeping out on the street? They got 45 million people in student debt. We have to change the priorities. The only way we change priorities is taking on the economic and political special interests in this country. That's what my campaign is about.
That is infinitely reasonable. Infinitely reasonable. If you're part of the 99%, your bills have gone up. Healthcare, education, you have debt on your back, not because you've done anything wrong, just because you've had the temerity to get an education, or you've had the unfortunate luck of being ill. This guy runs in a race, and he makes the argument that, look, the wealthy have done fantastically well as productivity has skyrocketed and those profits have been sucked to the top. And that's entirely not acts of God, not acts of some kind of deity, not act of a king, but ultimately because the political and the media class have colluded together, being bought and paid for by moneyed interests to A, exclude the conversation of class from the discussion and focus on these issues of identity. And so all of this other hysteria and everything else comes about without dealing with the actual material needs of the individuals within the society itself, and then go so far as to say that those topics are off the table and the public is not interested in them. When really, the reality being, the public never lost interest in those things. The parties lost interest in those things as both parties ended up being bought. That's the truth of it. Sanders makes the argument that the priorities of this particular government needs to change. How do you give 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, and then the next president comes in and says the thing that we need right now is a tax cut to give the 1% that much more? All of the people in this particular society that work in this society, the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers, the haberdashers, the people that pour your coffee, the people that do your streets, that clean the streets, that pick up the trash, all of the people, think of all of society, stretch your consciousness to stand on the outside of the world and think of all of the work that is necessary to make your society go, to all of the services, everything. And with all of the physical labor, all of the mental labor, all of the anguish and the stress that's associated with all of that labor, all of that toll, the best days and the hours of an individual's life, and 95% of the resources of that go to the top 1%. And then they turn around and give another tax cut on top of it. Amazon, Jeff Bezos, it is impossible for Jeff Bezos to be Jeff Bezos, meaning for him to be a billionaire, without Jeff Bezos having all of these people to either buy his products or work at his stores. Meaning it is impossible for him to be any level of successful, for him to have any level of self-actualization for his particular ideas without other human beings helping him do that. And yet, he gets $1 billion. How does an individual get $1 billion when his fate is intrinsically linked to the individuals that buy his stuff and work at his stores? Stand outside of a system for the moment and ask yourself, is that fair? He is entirely dependent upon human beings, the people in this particular society, again, to buy the products or work at his stores. And yet those people have to agitate and bitch and moan and get pissed off just to get $15 an hour. And he walks away with $1 billion, again, entirely dependent upon the people that actually do the work. How is that fair? Now, whether you want to say those people should make more cash, whether you want to say that, yeah, that doesn't seem fair at all. It seems that the rich has taken it all, and that, yeah, maybe you do need a tax system that gives some of that back in the context of Medicare for all, where the government pays for health care, or the government creates a progressive taxation system in order to cover health care and cut costs, and also doing the same thing for education. His point is, you can have political solutions to deal with these particular ills of society. And the notion of rugged individualism is just propaganda that's been heaped upon you in the interest of maintaining a system that is not in your best interest. Sanders is making the argument. That's what he's doing here. That's all that's taking place. And they're asking him about Cuba. They're asking him about Cuba. It's like, look, the stuff and the framing that takes place in our politics is amazing. I mean, Joe Biden in this debate literally called the president of China a thug and boasted about invading areas of China's or Chinese territory. I mean, it's utterly amazing some of the stuff that they say. And they don't think that it's weird. They don't think that it's odd. None of that stuff. They just run with it. Sanders stuck with one point that he never deviated from. And that basically was the argument of class. This is an issue of class. I am bringing a political movement of all of these people with righteous indignation that our system needs to fundamentally change and attune itself to issues that affect the material interests of the people in this particular society. Not just the 1%, but also the 99%. It is a compelling argument, and it's an argument that he continuously made. When they asked him, well, let me go back to the first part, because people were saying the first video was mangled. Sanders started this debate off setting the tone, and he never deviated from the tone. That's why I make the argument in the last video that he won this debate for that very specific reason. Everyone else in the debate was going after him. He, for the most part, maintained the fact that he was a fighter for the middle class, for the poor, for the downtrodden, for the disenchanted, for the misfits of the political space. And he never wavered from that. Despite the attacks, they couldn't lay a glove on him because ultimately they never actually dealt with the main reason that people are backing him. They believe he's authentic. And not just authentic, he's talking to issues that directly, materially affect them. Meaning for the first time, their entrance into the political space may actually have real, tangible, economic benefits. Why wouldn't you support that person?
How will you convince voters that a democratic socialist can do better than President Trump with the economy?
Well, you're right. The economy is doing really great for people like Mr. Bloomberg and other billionaires. In the last 3 years, billionaires in this country saw an $850 billion increase in their wealth. But you know what? For the ordinary American, things are not so good. Last year, real wage increases for the average worker were less than 1%. Half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 87 million Americans have no health insurance or are underinsured. 45 million people are struggling with student debt. 500,000 people tonight are sleeping out on the street, including 30,000 veterans. That is not an economy that's working for the American people. That's an economy working for the 1%. We're going to create an economy for all, not just wealthy campaign contributors.
Mayor Bloomberg.
That's the point. Right there. That's the point. That is the entirety and the point. That meaning, if you were looking for a theme for this particular campaign and why Sanders is getting the African American vote, the white vote, the Hispanic vote, the Asian vote, the working class vote, and having all of those groups without alienating one another, is because A, all of those groups are functioning under a banner of class, something that directly affects them. And the person who's the avatar of that legitimate righteous indignation, is an earnest arbiter of that particular cause. He's just set the theme of the entirety of this election cycle. And he's trusted on this particular point. That's what he's here for. Now, everyone else immediately in this debate attack him. This is the guy who they keep saying is not a Democrat. That's actually a bonus for him that he's not considered a Democrat. And the fact that you're attacking the person who's pushing for health care for everybody, saying it's a human right, that's saying education is a human right. We're talking about issues of human development, allowing people to develop their particular potential, but also not necessarily hobbling people if they have the misfortune of ending up in some kind of medical issue. These were supposed to be democratic values, just in general. And the entirety of the party is leveled against the person that is pushing these democratic, bread and butter, materialistic, directly affect poor, middle class, the overwhelming majority of America values. And the Democratic Party is aligned entirely against it. That is endemic of the problem, right? You have a audience that was rooting for a billionaire, full of people, effectively a wine cave crowd, where they had to pay $1,700 to $3,000 to even get in to sit and participate. And this is the Democratic Party. Like I said in the other video, FDR is spinning in his grave. Immediately after Sanders said that, what do you think Bloomberg's response was going to be? He made a substantive plea to the issues and the plights of the poor and the middle class in this particular society. Listen to how he's responded to it.
Mayor Bloomberg, I'll let you respond to that. Do you think Senator Sanders' economy would be better for America than President Trump?
I think that Donald Trump thinks it would be better if he's president. I do not think so. Vladimir Putin thinks that Donald Trump should be president of the United States, and that's why Russia is helping you get elected.
Russia is helping you get elected. Bernie Sanders makes his pitch, and this is how he's responded. This is A, incoherent, B, it didn't even go together all that well, and C, if you believe that the Russian deployment issue has legs, you pay way too much for your debate prep, buddy. Elizabeth Warren turns around and says she thinks she's a better president than Bernie Sanders, and effectively makes this pitch that she gets things done, insinuating Sanders doesn't, and then gets pissy about saying that her non-Medicare for all plan that people found out to be somewhat of a flop, that Sanders supporters effectively attacked her plan. Tom Steyer argues that Sanders is right, but Sanders goes too far and that radical centrism is the way to do it. Joe Biden goes about the Brady Bill. I guess the point here is none of these people touch the main core issue that Sanders hits upon, meaning this main issue of class, which is the reason why all of these people are backing Sanders in the first place. They don't quite get it. And as such, they aren't necessarily hitting on why he is popular and why he is winning this race. The last one I'm going to show, again, it's one that I showed in the last video. After everybody takes their shot at Sanders, this is how he responds. Notice what he goes back to. He just keeps it on the exact same note.
By the way,
Pete
has gotten Pete mentions what the American...
Senator Sanders, your response?
Pete mentioned, I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why. And maybe, Pete mentions what the American people want. I will tell you, Pete, what the American people want, and Joe, what the American people want. They don't want candidates to be running to billionaires for huge amounts of funding.
Right, let's clear this up once and for all.
Pete has gotten funding
you've got people
from
believing
over
something
50
that is false.
billionaires.
This
Joe,
needs
I
to be
think, has
cleared
gotten
up.
a little bit more. What the American people want, by the way, and a lot of the issues we'll be discussing tonight are issues I raised 4 years ago. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour, making public colleges and universities tuition free, and finally doing what every other major country on earth does, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right through a Medicare for all single-payer system.
He stays on key. it wasn't that Sanders had a stellar debate. There was no way to have a stellar debate. You have 5 people just hitting you constantly. It was more so that none of them had a breakout moment, but none of them could lay a glove on him. And ultimately, his point that he wanted to make, he was able to get out. And like I showed before, CBS's own poll at the end showed Sanders as being the winner. Who do you think is best to beat Trump? Sanders, 26% takes it. And the other poll that came out with that had Sanders winning in the one of basically who were you most impressed by? Sanders also wins that one. All right, I'm going to end this. Pete Buttigieg is loathsome. Listen to this.
Forgetting about the Republicans for one moment, among the Democrats you have on speed dial in your phone, how are they reacting to this dramatic rise of Bernie Sanders?
There's a growing realization within the Democratic Party, and we wrote about it with Phil Rucker on today's front page, that Senator Sanders represents an ascendant left-wing movement that could move in the coming weeks and months toward a takeover of the Democratic Party, a revolt against the centrists, the donors in the party who have long controlled power and have had a big influence over the nominees. Sanders, in the political wilderness for decades, going back to his days in Burlington, now finds himself at this late stage in his career as a possible standard bearer for a party that has been rapidly changing, moving more toward issues like climate change, healthcare access, and being okay with phrases like democratic socialism instead of being averse.
Yes. That's accurate. That is accurate. All right. I'm going to end this. Wesley Walker. Oh, thank you, Wesley. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. All right. I'm going to end this. Like, share, subscribe.